Welcome, fellow explorers. My name is Christian Alexanderson, and this is Hemlocks to Hellbenders, a podcast highlighting Pennsylvania's parks, forests, and great outdoors. One of the strangest things about getting older has been the shift in my interests. Despite being intensely curious as a kid, I never cared about nature growing up. I didn't climb trees or capture bugs or explore creeks. But as I've gotten older, all that's changed, which has made me feel like I'm constantly catching up to those that have spent their entire lives trekking through the woods, paddling on rivers, and exploring the natural world. I often think to myself, am I too old to start learning how to identify trees? What's the point of birding if it's going to take me 20 years to catch up? Is it sad that I do a podcast about nature while still knowing so little about it? A little imposter syndrome mixed in there, of course. Luckily, my positive self-talk tamps those thoughts down long enough for me to embrace my curiosity. And since I've spent so much time outside, I've found more subjects that I want to learn about. One of those topics is geology. Who else can relate to walking around and finding a cool-looking rock or fossil and thinking, I wonder what that is? I know I do it all the time. You can't spend much time in Pennsylvania without running into examples of incredible geology. From the Appalachian and Allegheny Mountains to the Susquehanna and Delaware rivers, Pennsylvania is packed with geologic features. State parks like Leonard Harrison, Ricketts Glen, World's End, McConnell's Mill, and Hickory Run are just a few of the state lands that have unique rocks, boulders, minerals, fossils, and cliffs on full, beautiful display. Quartz, slate, shale, limestone, sandstone, and marble are woven throughout the Commonwealth, and they can be found literally everywhere, under our feet and above our heads, on the sides of the road and in the middle of the forest. Rocks are just cool, but as I've said, I don't know very much about them, so I want to interview someone who did. I'm excited to welcome Russell Losco to the podcast. Russ is a soil scientist and geologist adjunct professor at Westchester University and the host of PCPG's A Poorly Sorted but Well-Rounded series. Russ, thanks so much for joining the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
What first got you interested in geology?
Well, that's an interesting question because I haven't always been a geologist. But I will say that as a child, I was fascinated by rocks and soil, and I've given some thought to it, as I get up in years. And I think one of the things that drew me to it was just being poor. I grew up.
Okay.
Outside of a steel town outside of Pittsburgh. My dad was a union steel worker, and we didn't have much. We were poor. We didn't know it at the time, but I didn't have a lot of toys to play with, so I collected rocks, and I played in the dirt, and I can still hear my mother's voice saying, "Stop playing in the dirt. You're never going to amount to anything." I'm a certified professional soil scientist for a long time, as well as a professional geologist. But I would just bring home rocks and fossils and all kinds of stuff like that. And then when I started college, I went to IUP in the Indiana University of Pennsylvania. And the first semester, I took an introduction to geology class, and I found it incredibly interesting. I was on a different track, though. I wanted to be an archaeologist. It's kind of weird, though. I ended up not being an archaeologist. I got into primatology. I spent 11 years studying monkeys.
Oh, wow.
Those years working in the jungle. And then I made a career shift because I wasn't in the jungle anymore, and I wasn't happy sitting in a building with no windows. I did a career shift and got into soil science. Kind of went back to my roots, found it fascinating, went back to school for it, and then always still collecting rocks all over the place. And in fact, a number of my colleagues who were soil scientists used to say, you spend a little too much time on those hard things. We're supposed to deal with the soft stuff. And then my wife and I took a vacation to Costa Rica back in, I want to say like 2005 or 2006, and I saw a volcano erupt. I was like, oh my God, I need it. It's been a while. I need to understand that better. And we came back and I enrolled in a night course. And the next thing I knew, I was in a graduate program and became a geologist. And now I teach it as well as practicing it. So it's been a long, serpentine trip to get me here. But here I am.
Yeah, as my dad would say, you lived a life.
I have students every now and then who go, I want to be focused like you, and I'm like, oh no, no, I wasn't focused. I took the, squirrel in traffic approach to my career.
What type of rocks are most commonly found here in Pennsylvania?
Well, good question. Pennsylvania has really diverse and really interesting geology. Uh, However, most of the state is dominated by sedimentary rocks, sandstones, shales, some coal measures. Uh, as a child, I read about and learned about igneous and metamorphic rocks and didn't really think they existed because they were nowhere around me. Um, but you get down into the southeastern part of the state here, and we do have volcanic intrusions here. Uh, we have most of, or a big chunk of southeastern Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Delaware County, Chester County, southern part of Lancaster County, is all high-grade metamorphic rocks that are incredibly old, much older than the rest of the rocks of Pennsylvania. So you can really find a little bit of everything here in Pennsylvania.
What role did ancient oceans and glaciers play in forming Pennsylvania's bedrock and surface features?
Well, as I said, the geology of Pennsylvania is incredibly fascinating. Large portions of Pennsylvania were laid down under shallow seas. If we can take a step back in time, about say 350, 400 million years ago, Africa was moving towards North America, collided with North America, pushing up the Appalachian Mountains, which at their peak were higher than the Himalayas are now. Uh, then it and those continents together, actually all the continents came together in what's called a supercontinent that we know as Pangea. That started to split up about 200 million years ago. Uh, so you have these high mountains, and what happens when you have high mountains? You get a lot of erosion. And most of that erosion was heading towards the west. So those sedimentary rocks I was talking about that were all around me outside of Pittsburgh, that's the mud and the sand and the silt that was washed off of those mountains as they were eroded down. Some, moved to the west or to the east as well. That's the reason we have, the Delmarva Peninsula and New Jersey and the Jersey and Delaware and Maryland shores. When you walk on those beaches, you're walking on sand that used to make up the Appalachian Mountains. So while this is happening, while those mountains are eroding down, the inner part of North America was covered by a shallow sea, and that sea extended into the western part of Pennsylvania. So these sediments are being laid down in this shallow sea and forming these rock layers that later would become, what is Pennsylvania. And then, as I said, about 200, 201 million years ago, Pangea started to split apart. And when it did, so right now the splitting is occurring out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. When it started to split across the southeastern part of Pennsylvania. So the place that I live now in southeastern Pennsylvania was attached to Africa and was moving away. And you had this upwelling of magma and lava flows and stuff like that. That stopped after about a million years, and the rifting started to the east of us, and we've stayed welded on as part of Pennsylvania. But that explains why the geology in the southeastern part is very different from the rest of it. Uh, and you asked about glaciers. Well, it's real easy to say, well, a certain feature formed back in the ice age. People tend to think in singulars. There were actually a lot of ice ages. Usually, when we talk about ice ages, we're talking about the ones in the last 2.5 million years, where there were about somewhere like 13 or 14 of them. The most recent one, which leaves most of its impact on Pennsylvania, really sculpted the landscape. The northern tier, what we think of as mountains, is actually a plateau. It's flat. with these steep valleys cutting into it. You go up into, say, like Sullivan County area. They call it the Endless Mountains because if you get to the top of one, what do you see? You see the ridge of the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And really, what you're seeing is the top of this plateau that was flattened off by the glaciers. Those valleys were cut by the meltwater from the glaciers as the glaciers melted and retreated. But the glaciers only covered at their peak in the last ice age, they only covered about, I'm going to say like a quarter or a third of Pennsylvania. Northern tier, it kind of bends down in the east and the west. So they came much closer to Pittsburgh. In the east here, it's about Allentown is about the furthest extent. But if you think about, you've got a mile thick of ice sitting there, it's going to be cold down here. So we were in the southern part of the state, we were in permafrost. We were tundra. Uh, so you had conditions that we see today if you go up to like Fairbanks, Alaska or Denali in Alaska. That's the conditions that we had back then. I did my master's research on a site actually in Georgetown, Delaware, which is down in the southern part of Delaware. And we found evidence of permafrost there. It was that far south. And at the time, when we discovered it, we had discovered the southernmost extent of permafrost in North America during the last glaciation. We held that title for about a month before they found it to the south of us. Now they've pushed that line down into well into Virginia. So even though the glaciers weren't carving up and flattening the southern part of the state, it still impacted it because tundra is oftentimes technically desert. And so you have these very dry, very cold conditions that changed the landscape.
What are some of the most geologically significant natural landmarks in Pennsylvania?
Well, how long do you have to go through? The list is enormous. I have a book sitting here on my desk that's a bit dated, but it's still a good book. It's called Outstanding Scenic Geologic Features of Pennsylvania, and it's 500 and some pages. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in Pennsylvania. So you can go just about anywhere and find something that has serious geologic significance. So I can go to the park right down the road from me and find things that are really, really significant. A colleague of mine over in Lancaster County at Franklin and Marshall College, I went out to help her and her husband with some research one day, and she goes, "Oh, come down to the creek with me. I have to show you something." And we go down, and there's bones sticking out of the bank. And she goes, "Do you know what those are?" And I said, Not real good at animal bones. Human bones I can do." She goes, "It's elk." And she goes, "I have some funding to do some radiocarbon dating." The dates came back at about 5,000 years old.
Wow.
Um, you go up north, you can see glacial features, which are all in their own way fascinating. There's been some great maps done of that area. You go out to the Pittsburgh area, you get those steep cliffs along the Ohio River that are absolutely spectacular, and by the way, loaded with fossils. You go up to Erie and you have Presque Isle, which is formed on top of a glacial moraine. The reason that spit sticks out into Lake Erie, and I'm working on a podcast on that, is because the sand being washed up on shore lands on this moraine. A moraine is a pile of material pushed up by a glacier. Um, you go to where Pennsylvania was splitting open 200 million years ago, and you find the remains of lava flows or of volcanic intrusions that have impacted the history of our state. So it's not like I can say, oh, everybody needs to go to this one place. There's this really cool thing there. No, just open your eyes when you're driving around, when you're walking around. everything around you is significant. Everything around you is fascinating. You drive through Lancaster County and you see the Amish farms there, and you say, "Oh, isn't this cool? Why are they here?" That's because it's underlain by limestone, which makes for really rich soil. So uh, there's anywhere you go in Pennsylvania, there is stuff to see. We have Delaware Water Gap. We have the water gaps along the Susquehanna. Those are all geologic features. So, sorry, I can't point to one thing.
I mean, it has to be exciting that there is such a giant variety. I mean, when I think of some of the things that I find interesting or things that I want to go visit, it's not like I just want to see cliffs or I just want to see caves or I just want to see this or that. There's just so much to see around Pennsylvania, and it's everywhere.
It is. It is. And there's a great book. There's a series of books called Roadside Geology that's been published over the years. And there is one for Pennsylvania, and it's aimed at the layperson. And so, for example, if you're going to drive out the turnpike, um, and you wonder what it is you're looking at, well, this will explain it to you in layman's terms. It'll give you, if you want to know, it'll give you the background, how the stuff got there, explain just what you're looking at. There's also an app for your phone that, again, if you don't want to take the time to read up on this stuff ahead of time, there's an app called Flyover Country, which was developed on a federal grant. I get to meet the developer of it, and you preload your trip and say, I'm going to drive from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, say, and it will load all the geologic maps for that. And as you're driving along, the person in the passenger seat can be looking at the phone and saying, "Ooh, there's dinosaur fossils, 20 miles this way, or there's, these fossils here, or that's a volcanic intrusion." So, the stuff is everywhere.
How did the formation of the Appalachian Mountains shape Pennsylvania's current landscape? How important were they?
Oh, absolutely important. As I mentioned, the western part of Pennsylvania is all sediments that sloughed off of the Appalachians when they were eroding down to their current size. I mean, imagine jumping into a time machine, if those existed, and going back in time and landing in Philadelphia and looking to the west, and you've got the Andes or the Himalayas right there. Well, where did they go? Well, that stuff made up what is now the western and, to a certain extent, the northern part of Pennsylvania. Created those beaches that those of us in the east drive to in the summer. So yeah, it was absolutely vitally important to making Pennsylvania what it is today.
Plus, it gave us the pretty cool nickname of Rocksylvania.
Yeah, there is that too.
Can you tell us about the Pennsylvania Grand Canyon and how it was formed?
Sure. Yeah, the Pennsylvania Grand Canyon, that's I believe that's Pine Creek Gorge. It's been a while since I've been up there. Uh, that was formed again by meltwater as the glaciers were retreating. So glaciers do some interesting things. A glacier is literally, I mean, the ones that you would see today, unless you're going to go to Greenland or Antarctica, are alpine glaciers, and they're like a river of ice. But a continental glacier, like what we had during the last ice age, the Laurentide ice sheet, which stretched from Alaska to Greenland, uh, is enormous. It's like an ocean of ice. And as it's moving, and it will move because it's just so big, it has to. There's so much pressure on that ice that it forces the lower ice to, even though it's solid, to act like it's semi-fluid. And so it flows very slowly and it grinds up the landscape. And one thing it'll do is it will cut off valleys and it will deposit material across the valleys and make a dam. Sometimes the dam is made of ice, sometimes it's made of rocks and soil and stuff. Sometimes it's both. And as the glacier is retreating as the climate is warming. You're getting more and more meltwater filling up that valley behind that dam. At some point, it's going to overtop the dam and you're going to get a torrential flood. And that's what happened at Pine Creek Gorge at the Grand Canyon of Pennsylvania. So you get this catastrophic flood that uh, chews through that dam that the glacier made, and takes all that material and uses it as an abrasive to grind out the valley even deeper. So that's why the valley is as deep as it is. And really, if you go up to that northern tier, you do see a lot of valleys. I mean, the Pine Creek Gorge is the largest and most spectacular, but you see other valleys that are like that and similar origins.
I was really excited when I went to Leonard Harrison State Park for the first time that they talk about this, that they mention and show in some diagrams like this is how it happened over time. Because when you see something so big, I mean, yes, it's not the actual Grand Canyon, but it's still a really beautiful and significant area. When you can see that on a diagram and to understand its vastness of what it took to make something this big, it's really incredible.
Yes, yes, it is. Imagine I mean, we've seen some pretty bad floods this year. Down in Texas, very famously. Some other states are getting them too, and I fear we're going to see more of those. But take that and multiply it by, 100 or 1,000, and that's what you're talking about.
What can you tell us about the geology of the Gettysburg National Military Park?
Oh, I was hoping you were going to ask this one. Um, Probably the most fascinating lecture that I ever heard on geology when I was young and in college was on the Gettysburg battlefield, and I wish I had a better memory of it. And unfortunately, that professor is long since retired. But I've spent some time, researching it and visiting there. And the main thing is, when we think of a battlefield like Gettysburg, you hear about, the generals and this happened and this unit charged here and all that. But battles are shaped by landscape.
Yeah.
And one of the things that officers are taught as they work their way up through the ranks and in their training and everything is to use the land, to use the landscape. Well, what happened was, first of all, the way that the Confederate Army could get there was dictated by the water gaps. They had to get through those ridges. So they had to go to where the water gaps were. And so their path was predictable to a certain extent. So when the Union Army met them at Gettysburg, the Confederates didn't have time to pick their location. They had to pick the location that they had because the Union Army had taken the high ground, which is always what you want to do. And the high ground included that gnarly knob called Little Round Top, which makes for an absolute fortress to defend. I mean, imagine having to charge up a steep hill around boulders to just to get to your enemy so you can fight them. But on a grander scale, uh, the and I do have to say that Little Round Top is a volcanic intrusion.
Oh,
It
wow.
is left over from when Pangea was splitting apart 200 million years ago. One of those rifts occurred in this region, and the lava and magma, it's magma when it's underground, it's lava when it gets to the surface. So that came pushing up, and it's harder than the rock around it. So it's more resistant. So it ends up forming a hill. So we've got this volcanic intrusion with these really hard rocks. But the high ground there was held by the Union, and what dictated the high ground was the bedrock underneath. It's mostly sedimentary rock, and that gets laid down in a level area, but then it can get tilted based on various things that happen, like a volcanic intrusion. And when you stand there, the difference between the high ground and the low ground is subtle. But one of the things that happens if you were standing where the Confederates were, there's an optical illusion that occurs looking at the Union lines, and they look closer than they really are. Now, back then they didn't have range finders or anything like that. So it was literally, where do we aim our cannons? And someone, sticking their thumb up and going, well, I think that's about 500 yards. So let's, aim for 500 yards. So it looked like they were closer to the Union lines. So when the Confederates started bombarding the Union lines, and they did that for a long time, the shot was actually passing over the Union lines and exploding in their, not in their rear where the cooks and everything and the hospital is, but even farther back than that. It's not hurting anybody. So in the morning, when the Confederates, when Lee tells them, the famous Pickett's charge, which now we say, why would anybody charge across a mile of open ground? They didn't know it was a mile. It looked a lot closer than that. And they thought they were going to charge into lines that were absolutely decimated by their artillery. And they weren't. They were charging into lines who had stayed up part of the night watching the great fireworks display, and then were fresh and ready and well fed in the morning and knew what was coming for them. And so, not to downplay the bravery and the sacrifice of so many people there, but the geology really dictated the way that battle was going to go.
Yeah, when I first visited Gettysburg when I was a kid, I mean, you can't help but go through the boulders of Devil's Den and
Yes.
roam around that sort of thing. I mean, while I didn't understand at the time the hallowed ground aspect of it, or maybe how important and huge it is, you just see it, and it's one of those things that you want to climb around in.
Yes.
And the fact that it was so important in the battle, as you learn for snipers and being able for various things like that, makes it even more special. The idea of how important geology, elevation, landscape, how important all that is in every aspect, especially war.
Yes. Absolutely.
There's a number of state parks that have outstanding geologic features. What will people see at Ricketts Glen State Park if they visit?
Well, Ricketts Glen is an absolutely fascinating place, and I highly recommend everybody visit it. Even though there's a part of me that wants to tell people don't go there. There's a zombie apocalypse because it gets crowded.
Sure.
But even with the crowds there, it's worth it because what you are seeing there is it sits on the Allegheny front, which is the edge of the Alleghenies. So the lowlands to the south are the beginning of what is called the Triassic Basin, which formed as Pangea was splitting apart. So it formed this low area. But the Allegheny front is the remnants of those Appalachians. So you have high ground, uh, steep drop off, and then the beginnings of this low ground. So the favorite of most people when they go to Ricketts Glen is to start the trail from the top. And there's a loop that's about 3 miles that will take you down one branch of the creek and then turn and come up the other one. And there's something like 20 some named
Yeah,
waterfalls.
I think 21.
21, yes. I've hiked it probably 30 or 40 times over the years, but uh, and some of them are so tall that you won't believe you're in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
There some of them are over 100 feet tall, and if you get there after a heavy rain, they're pretty scary. Uh, so without even looking at the rocks themselves, just the waterfalls are spectacular. And it is, though, you might say 3 miles. Well, 3 miles isn't that bad. Well, it's 3 miles broken into three parts, a mile down, a mile up, and then a mile across to your starting point. And in that mile down, you lose something like 1,000 feet of elevation.
Yeah.
And then on the next leg, you got to make up the 1,000 feet of elevation. So it's not something that you want to do, if you've just sprained an ankle or something like that. If you just had a hip replacement, you might want to give it a couple months before you try this one. Uh, but anyone who wants to delve even deeper into Ricketts Glen Park, there is an excellent podcast on that. It's the first one that I did.
Perfect.
And the biggest complaint or the biggest feedback I got back was it should have been longer. So I'm probably going to have to revisit that one and go into greater detail.
Not a complaint I get, I gotta tell you that. Hickory Run State Park has a unique feature called the Boulder Field. What is it?
Oh, good loaded question there. Hickory Run is a fascinating place. Yes, it has a boulder field, and we can see these boulder fields in various places across the northern tier, and some even there's a boulder field down in Bucks County, down in the southeast. It's much smaller than the one at Hickory Run, and it's one of those things you know if you want to start a fight among a group of geologists, give them a couple of drinks and then say, okay, let's go around the room. Everybody tell me how you think the boulder field started. And within about 10 minutes, people are going to be shouting and someone's going to be waving their finger under somebody else's nose. A friend of mine, a colleague of mine at Westchester University, actually did some flyovers of it. This is before we had drones, using a radio controlled airplane, and tried to do an analysis of the imagery, and he did a really good job of cataloging what rocks of what size were there, but at the end was still scratching his head going, I still don't know why they're there. It is related to the glaciers, but they weren't dropped there by glaciers. So, um, you to anyone who wants to go to school, be a geologist, and be a famous geologist, study the boulder field and give us a good explanation for it, and your name will go down in history. The thing is, it is spectacular and it is enormous. And I remember taking the kids there when they were very young, and they thought it was the greatest thing in the world, climbing over all the rocks and boulders. It is a wonderful place to visit.
And now, let's hear from our sponsors. Join the Keystone Trails Association's Trail Care team to show some love to the trails you love. KTA organizes hands-on stewardship events and training workshops to maintain and expand hiking trails in Pennsylvania. You can find a trail care event near you. Check out KTA's schedule of events online at kta-hike.org. Are you looking for your next adventure? Unlock some of the best landscapes in Pennsylvania with incredibly detailed, highly curated, waterproof trail maps from the folks at Purple Lizard. They create extraordinary maps of Pennsylvania state forests for people who love to explore the outdoors. Find them at your local outfitters, bike shops, and bookstores, or visit purplelizard.com, where your next adventure begins. Ready for more time outdoors? Check out Think Outside with the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation, a new podcast from the foundation. You'll hear stories, tips, and ideas to make the most of Pennsylvania's parks and forests. Whether it's a quick hike or a weekend adventure, Think Outside with the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation will inspire your next outing. Find it wherever you listen to podcasts. Looking for a way to add some local Pennsylvania flair to your space? Check out Sister Sunflowers. They create unique stickers inspired by small local spaces that make your community shine. From quirky caves to hidden local gems, their stickers bring your favorite places to life. Perfect for your laptop, water bottle, or anywhere that needs a little hometown love. For both locals and visitors, there's stickers, magnets, prints, and more celebrating Pennsylvania's most iconic parks and forests. And for more avid explorers, there's even a hand-drawn poster to keep track of the Pennsylvania state parks and forests that you've been to. Use the code HELLBENDER15 at checkout to get 15% off your first order. Support local, inspire adventure, and decorate with meaning. Only at Sister Sunflowers. Shop now and celebrate the places that make your town special. All right, back to the show. What other state parks would you recommend people visit to see unique geology in Pennsylvania?
Let's see. Well, with what 120 some state parks, there's certainly a lot of them to choose from. Obviously, we've mentioned some of them. The little cousin of Ricketts Glen is World's End State Park. It's a small state park down in one of those gorges that was washed out by the glaciers. There's some hiking trails around there. You can see some great geologic features. If I give too many of them, I'm going to slight others. Um, in our conversation previously, you mentioned Little Buffalo State Park, also Colonel Denning State Park out in central Pennsylvania. Those are absolutely beautiful. Um, White Clay. I'm partial to the White Clay State Park and Preserve down here in southeastern Pennsylvania. And again, there's a podcast on that. There's some really interesting stuff there. Pretty much, well, Pymatuning State Park, northeastern part of the state. Uh, Wonderful story there geologically. You have both the glacial geology uh, and it's an oil and gas producing area. So you can go hiking through the woods and it's relatively flat, and then you come on a big pile of boulders that was dropped by a glacier, and on the other side of that you hit a gas well. There's so much to see out there. I mentioned Presque Isle. Um, yeah, if you gave me a list of all the state parks, I would be going down them, going, oh, this one,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
this one, yeah, this, and
Yeah, I think Moraine State Park was so named because of that too, out
yes,
in Western
yes.
Pennsylvania.
Ironically, though, I grew up not too far from Moraine State Park. I remember going fishing there as a in when I was like 12 or 13 years old when it was newly opened. The irony of it is there was no moraine there. They borrowed the name. The moraine was to the north of there. The glaciers never got to Moraine State Park, but it was what is known as a paraglacial lake. Remember, I said, the glaciers impacted, even though the glaciers weren't quite there. So there was a lake formed by meltwater from the glaciers that that then drained as time went on, and so they dammed that back in the 60s and allowed it to refill and made Moraine State Park. And if you're going to go to Moraine State Park, take the short hop a couple miles over to McConnell's Mill State
Oh
Park,
yeah.
which is another glacial feature. This again, a steep gorge, big boulders up on the hills, and that one is actually really interesting because the Ohio River, what we now know of as the Ohio River that flows southwest and into the Mississippi, didn't used to. For most of its history, it flowed north. Most of the drainage pattern of Pennsylvania was flowing to the north towards what's now Hudson's Bay. But during the last ice age, right at about the point where McConnell's Mill is, uh, as the glaciers were coming down, the thing you've got a mile or more of ice piled there. That stuff is heavy and that depresses the land surface, and that tilted it and made uh, the Ohio River start to change course. But as the ice retreated and the land rose back up, that's what forced the Ohio River to cut down through that gorge where McConnell's Mill is and cut that gorge, and it changed the course of the Ohio River. So the Ohio River used to drain to the north, as I said, to what's now Hudson's Bay. This is before the Great Lakes existed. And at that point, there's actually an overlook above McConnell's Mill that is the Nick Point, the point at which it tilted and it shifted to the south and now flows to the Gulf of Mexico.
That's so cool. I had no idea that was the case. That's so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, which I think leads into the next question. What geologic clues can we see today that shows us how the land has changed over millennia? And in another way, what can you see that maybe I don't necessarily see?
Okay. Well, again, I could do a whole, 2 hour lecture to a class on this, but uh, so go to the Ohio River Valley and look at those cliffs. You're looking at, and as I said, they're full of fossils. Most of those fossils are plants, ferns, stuff like that. Those were laid down during a time period that predates the dinosaurs. And the North America was in a different location at the time. It was down in the tropics. So those were tropical rainforests back then. So right there, you've got evidence of it. Uh, and those are exposed all up and down that river valley. If you go to the northern part of the state and you see the glacial features, these glacial lakes, some of the lakes like Conneaut Lake and Eaglesmere. Those are kettle lakes that were scoured out uh, by the glacier, leaving a depression. Usually, what happened was there was a lake in front of the glacier, and actually icebergs broke off and were floating in that lake, and the wind pushed them aground, and then the waves rocked them back and forth, and they did that until they formed a depression. And then after the glaciers retreat, it fills up with the meltwater, and you get these beautiful lakes. And we have a number of those across the northern tier of Pennsylvania. Come down to the southeastern part of the state, and you can see these diabase outcrops that are intrusive volcanic rocks from when North America was splitting apart, from when Pangea was splitting apart. We also have little spots known as serpentine barrens. Serpentine is a very unusual type of rock that forms deep down in the crust, and it gets dredged up when two continents come together. And imagine you've got, two cement blocks sitting on a piece of paper, and you slide the two cement blocks together. The paper is going to buckle up in between them at some point. Well, that happens with the Earth's mantle. And so we get these little fingers of this material sticking up, and the serpentine barrens are generally small, but they're very unique. The rocks are green. The soil is very poor. Oftentimes they're parks because the farmers that owned them donated them, because, as one farmer said to me once, he says, it's land so poor you can't raise heck on it. And they're the soil that derives from the serpentine is loaded with things like nickel and cadmium and cobalt and sometimes asbestos, stuff that's really toxic to plants. So you get a really weird stunted plant community in these serpentine barrens. And again, this is all giving us the history of the planet and of Pennsylvania.
If someone wanted to become a geologist just for fun, no lab coat, no degree, how could they start exploring the rocks, fossils, and landforms around them in Pennsylvania?
Really, all you need is curiosity. I mentioned that book, Roadside Geology of Pennsylvania. That's an excellent way to get started. The app I mentioned, Flyover Country, will be really helpful. There are some other apps that are good for learning geology, but really, it's just about curiosity. And maybe, get yourself a book on identifying rocks and go out and pick the stuff up. Uh, and see what the differences are in the different places that you go. Are the rocks fine grained? Are they coarse grained? Are they hard? Are they brittle? Uh, are they dense? Do they have crystals in them? And this starts to tell you something about the history of the landscape and what formed the rocks. And the more you delve into that, the more you examine it, the more information you can get out of it. I remember in graduate school, uh, one class where we did the lecture was on minerals that form, at different depths in the earth. And then, as with like a half an hour left in the class, the professor then handed us samples of rocks from around our area here in southeastern Pennsylvania and said, okay, based on the minerals that are in there and the size of them, how deep were these when they formed? And we had to calculate that. And it was 27 kilometers deep in the earth
Wow.
when those rocks formed. And now those are exposed on the surface. And those rocks here in the southeast, those high grade metamorphics, some of those are over 1 billion years old.
It sounds strange to think this way, but I take pride in of how old where we live is. Like
Oh,
I
yeah.
think we get ragged on a lot by like Europeans about how our history, American history, isn't very old, and sure, I understand where they're coming from, but it's like it is great to know that Susquehanna River is the oldest, one of the oldest, if not the oldest river in the world. We have
Yes.
so much amazing. If you see a rock, it didn't get made yesterday. All
No.
this stuff is old, and it's really interesting the more you dig into it, so to speak.
Yes, yes, it is. It's also fascinating to go places where the rocks are very new. I've done some work in Costa Rica. I actually published a book on the geology of Costa Rica a couple years ago, and there you can find rocks that were produced like last week. You don't want to be there when they're coming out of the volcano, but it's kind of fun. But here in Pennsylvania, yeah, our geologic history starts, as I said, a little over a billion years ago and stretches right on up into the present.
Several regions in Pennsylvania feature extensive networks of caves. Are there any places you recommend people visit to see unique formations?
Yes, not specific locations. Here's the directions to get to this cave. I don't have that because I stopped cave exploring some years ago. But there are widespread caves for example, the Lehigh Valley. There's large limestone outcroppings there. There are caves throughout the corridor, what's generally referred to as the Route 30 corridor. The Route 30, which crosses Lancaster County, Chester County, into Delaware County, was built there because the Native Americans had paths that went there. So when the Europeans came along, they followed those paths. So when you build your first roads, where do you build it? Alongside the path or on top of the path. And then when you build the railroads, where do you put those? Well, alongside the road that you already know about. And the reason there was a path there in the first place is because it's low lying, because it's limestone, and limestone dissolves. And so we have some very expensive roads built across that corridor that have a tendency to collapse from time to time. And we've invested a lot of money into investigating those and kind of plugging the leaks there. But all through those areas, you will find caves. There are some in Western Pennsylvania as well. We also get, I'm going to call them pseudo caves. We get rock shelters and abandoned mines. There are salt mines in Western Pennsylvania with shafts that you may or may not be able to access. There are tons and tons of old coal mines. Please be cautious going into them. Some of them are not safe, but there are plenty that you can visit as a tourist as well. And the caves, the great thing about caves is if you're in an area that's underlain by limestone and you don't have a cave around, don't worry, one's coming sooner or later. It's just a matter of time. If you're walking across, that topography, there's caves underneath your feet. They just haven't opened up yet. They're there. There's just no access to them.
How do rivers like the Susquehanna and Delaware fit into the state's geologic evolution?
Well, you mentioned that the Susquehanna River is one of the oldest rivers that there is. So the Susquehanna River was there, again, draining to the north a long, long time ago. It reversed direction, similar to what happened with the Ohio River. Uh, and I mentioned the water gaps along the Susquehanna, which are beautiful, by the way. If you drive up along the Susquehanna, you see these ridges that are cut into by the river. And it makes you wonder, how the heck does a river cut through a ridge? I mean, a ridge is big, you would think would act as a dam. The only logical explanation is that the river was there before the mountains were there. The river was there before the ridges were there. And that's one of the ways we know the Susquehanna is so old. So as the ridges were growing up, they were being notched by the river and being cut by them. And in fact, one of my colleagues and a former professor of mine at Westchester University is from Russia, and she is a geomorphologist. And she pointed out to me once that when you study about water gaps anywhere in the world, you learn about the ones in the Susquehanna.
Huh.
She studied in Moscow, and when they learned about water gaps, they talked about the ones on the Susquehanna. They're the best example that there are.
Cut cliffs give visitors a chance to see the geologic history of southeastern Pennsylvania. What do we know about how this region was formed?
So southeastern Pennsylvania, as I mentioned, very old. Uh, we're literally the rocks that we see exposed on the surface here were the bones of the continent. They were deep down in the continent. So how did they get to the surface? Well, in a billion years, you can erode a lot of stuff off. And this is a section of the continent where it is very old. It was around back when, the most complicated life form on the planet was a bacteria. And don't worry, these rocks were never in contact with those bacteria because these rocks were deep down in the earth. And as land is eroded, what happens is the continent rises up. Just like if you put a canoe in the water and put three people in it, it rides low in the water. One person gets out, the canoe rises up. Second person gets out, the canoe rises up. That's what happens when land erodes. And especially with the erosion of the Appalachians that allowed the continent to rise up and expose these deep bones of the earth, these high-grade metamorphics, the schists and the gneisses, and the quartzites, these very, very special rocks. There's a saying among geologists in Pennsylvania that in the western part of the state, you hit a rock with a hammer and it goes thud. In the southeastern part, you hit a rock with a hammer and it goes ping because they're much denser, they're much older.
Where can people go in the Southeast to explore this sort of geologic history?
Uh, Plenty of places. At Gettysburg Park, there's lots of opportunities there. I mentioned the White Clay Park and Preserve, which is growing and is unique in that it's a park in Pennsylvania that actually started in Delaware. Delaware started their White Clay Park and Preserve before Pennsylvania did, and then Pennsylvania acquired some land, and the two are contiguous. So you can start at one end of the park in Pennsylvania, where you don't have to pay a fee to use the park, and cross over into Delaware, where you do have to use a fee, but they collect those at the parking areas, so you can get in for free and get back out. Uh, let's see what else. As far as parks go, well, Fairmount Park in Philadelphia is a good place to see some really, again, deep gorges. They're not the sort of thing you're going to expect to see with big rock exposures, places you can swim and hike and do all kinds of fun stuff. I mentioned since we're talking about southeastern Pennsylvania, I don't want to slight the other counties in the area. I mentioned Bucks County, and that they have a boulder field. It's called Ringing Rocks. And it's called Ringing Rocks because the boulders are sitting there without any soil around them. So, if a rock is surrounded by soil and you smack it with a hammer, it still makes a ping if it's really hard, but it's a soft ping because it's being muffled by the soil. But there's no soil around these. So you can literally just walk around with a hammer and go ping, 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 ping. They call it Ringing Rocks.
Are there any rare or unique minerals found only in Pennsylvania?
There are so mineralogy is one of my weak points, but there are some very cool and unusual minerals in Pennsylvania. I'm sure there are in other parts of the state. You can find pyrite, which is not all that rare. It's what they call fool's gold. You can find that throughout the state. But in the southeast here, we get garnets and amethysts. So amethyst is just quartz that has some iron impurities into it, and it's purple. The unfortunate thing about amethysts is if they're exposed to the sun, they turn brown. Now, don't everybody, if you have an amethyst ring, don't be afraid to wear it outside in the sun. I mean, if it's exposed for, like 40 or 50 years. So oftentimes you walk a farm field in this area and you see a lot of brown quartz laying around and go, oh, this is really boring. Well, dig down. And if you find the quartz vein, there is a positive probability that it's purple. And the stuff is really beautiful. Uh, trying to think if there's some others. I know there are. I'm just not thinking. Well, the micas, we get those down here in the southeast. Mica is a mineral that is flat. It's always flat, and it forms in little thin layers. In fact, a piece of mica is referred to as a book of mica because you can really take just your thumbnail and stick it under one of those layers and peel it off.
Oh, wow.
And it's all over the place here. And I always, when I'm teaching minerals to intro level students, and I say, well, this is one of the ways you can tell a mineral is by its cleavage. How does it split? And I'll hold up a piece of it and I'll peel it apart. And I'll say, you're going to have minerals in front of you shortly. Please do the same thing. And I have to tell them this quick piece of advice. If you find a piece of mica on your hike, a really nice one, say maybe the size of a smartphone or something like that, you're going to say, wow, this is something I want to keep. And you're going to be tempted to slip it in your pocket to carry it out of there. Don't do that. Whatever you do, do not do that because it's flat and there's a positive probability that you're going to forget that it's in your pocket. And when those pants go into the laundry, an interesting thing happens. Detergent will make those little layers come apart. And the agitation in the washing machine breaks the mineral into a million little pieces. And the entire load of laundry is now filled with like what looks like little shards of broken glass. And if your wife's favorite blouse happens to be a part of that load of laundry, the follow-up conversation on that tends to be loud. So trust me on this one. You don't ever want to put mica in your pocket. Carry it in your hand, put it in a backpack, clench it in your teeth. Do not put it in a pocket.
That's good advice. Thank you.
Sure.
Do you have a favorite geologic feature in Pennsylvania?
Oh, there are so many of them. I love Ricketts Glen. I really do. I love there are some what are referred to as rock cities in Pennsylvania. It's usually up on ridge tops where you get these giant boulders that you can walk through. It's almost like you're walking between houses. There's some of those up in the northern tier in the Endless Mountains up on that plateau. You can run into those a lot. Uh, I'm fond of those. I'm also really fond of those cliffs around Pittsburgh because that's what sparked my interest as a child. And you can walk over to those and just pull the rocks out with your fingers. You don't need a rock hammer.
Is there a geologic feature in Pennsylvania that most people drive past without even noticing? And I'm guessing with what you've been saying, it's kind of all of them, or
Yeah.
a lot of them at least.
Yeah. They're all over the place. I there was when I was in graduate school, some of our classes were co-listed, so you had undergraduates and graduates together. Just the graduates had to do more than the undergraduates. There was an undergraduate who sat in front of me in this one class, and I used to swat him on the back of the head every now and then because he would say things like, and we got to be friends. It's not like I was beating the kid up or anything, but he would say, Pennsylvania is the most boring geology. I don't know why I'm studying in Pennsylvania. I would usually swat him about that. Uh, it's just a matter of looking. Um, I've told students many, many times that, start paying attention. You go for a walk in the woods with your friends. You're going to walk along a trail. Start being curious about what is around you. There's something shiny. You might pick it up. It might be just an ordinary rock. It might be something really interesting. You never know. And a lot of discoveries happen that way. Me finding that there was permafrost down in southern Delaware. That was one of those things. I'm standing there scratching my head. We've got an excavation open, and I'm looking at at these structures in the soil and scratching my head and going, I have no idea what this is. Go and read about it a little bit, come back the next day, ha ha ha, ha, that's what it is. Um, so look for things that look unusual or out of place, that don't belong there. There's a story that again that I tell students, and I'm I may butcher this story and get some parts wrong, but there was a high school student, I believe it was in South Africa, who discovered a new species of dinosaur. Did so sitting on the wall at the entrance to his school. You get those walls with a stone cap on them, polished stone, sitting on there on a sunny day, eating his lunch, and looked down at the rock. The stone had been in place there for a long, long time. Thousands of students probably sat there and noticed a pattern in it and went and asked his teacher. And the teacher came out and said, "Yeah, you're really seeing that pattern. I wonder what it is." And so they called a local museum, and a paleontologist came out, and it was a dinosaur skull embedded in the rock that had been cut in half and polished, and nobody ever noticed it. And he did. And fun thing, you discover a new species, you get to name it. You give it its scientific name. So here's a high school student who has this to his credit just because he was paying attention when nobody else was.
You know, you've told me before in a previous conversation that, quote unquote, there's plenty of mystery still out there.
Oh God, yes. There's fascinating stuff all around us. And there are new species of fossil to be discovered. Just, I want to say like 4 or 5 years ago at Westchester University, on a field trip in geology at a quarry, a student found a trilobite, which is an ancient, they were like a cockroach of the ocean. State fossil of Pennsylvania is a trilobite, by the way. He found a trilobite and took it to the professor and said, "What kind of trilobite is this? This is a little different than what we saw in class." And the professor realized that it was a new species.
Wow.
And the student, got partial credit for that. And together they chose the name for it. So yeah, there's plenty of mysteries still out there. The boulder fields, go explain those. There's lots of stuff to be seen, lots of stuff to be discovered. I remember when I was an undergraduate, and I remember a couple of students saying, "Well, all the really good discoveries have already been made. There's nothing left for us." Oh, no, no, no. We find new stuff all the time.
And you just got to work for it a little bit. That's fine.
Yeah, sometimes you got to work for it. Sometimes you just got to be curious. And as often as not, the discoveries are made by people who are amateurs or who are very new at it. I read a book on paleontology just about 2 or 3 years ago, and the author said there are three rules on a fossil finding expedition. Number one is the big find comes on the last day when you don't have enough time to really explore it. And so you got to plan for next year and hope that it's still there when you come back. Number two is if you're not finding anything, go to the bathroom. He said, guaranteed while your pants are around your ankles, you're going to see something. And rule number three is it's always the students that find the really good stuff because they don't know what they're looking for yet. And so they're just looking for anything unusual. And they may be picking things up and saying to the professor, "Is this something? No, that's nothing. Is this something? No, that's nothing. Is this something? Oh, wait a second. What is that?" And so it's the untrained eyes, and also the fact that they're younger and their eyes are better than old people like me. They see more and they find more, and so that goes to the public as well. You're out there, you see something, it looks interesting, bring it to somebody's attention. It might be nothing, it might be something, and you might be, explaining and opening up one of those mysteries that's waiting out there.
Where can people listen to PCPG's poorly sorted but well-rounded podcast series?
Well, the podcast is available. I believe it's on all the major platforms. We're on Spotify. We're on Apple Podcasts. There's a long list of them. There are also, if you're not into those sorts of things, if you go on the PCPG website, you don't have to be a geologist to go on there. All of the podcast episodes are on there. So if you don't want to, you don't like Spotify for some reason, you don't like Apple because you have an Android phone or whatever, just go to the website and they're all there. And they're free of charge. We do this just to educate the public.
Russ, thanks so much for talking to us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. This was a great experience, and I really appreciate it.
I want to thank my guest, Russ Losco, for joining the podcast. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Meta for more information about upcoming episodes. You can support the podcast by buying merch at hemlockstohellbenders.com, or you can click support this show in the podcast description to provide a monthly donation. This has been Hemlocks to Hellbenders. I'll see you out there. Hosting, production, and editing by Christian Alexanderson. Music by John Sauer. Graphics by Matt Davis.